Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the City Till We Die podcast, episode number 12. You join myself, Ben Ambrose, and my co host, Adam Harvey, for a milestone podcast for this City Till We Die YouTube channel, podcast, whatever you want to call it. Norwich City have won a game of football, but not only have they won a game of football, they've won a game of football at Carrow Road. Adam and I were there. My God, this scene's unbelievable. We are genuinely, I think we're tasked today with just not getting too carried away. But we're really excited to actually talk about a game of football and not be either fighting tears or having to restrain ourselves from going overboard with criticism. Adam, Norwich City and everyone associated with the club, players, staff, fans, needed that victory. It's going to dominate our discussion today. Give me your thoughts. How you feeling? Are you still buzzing from the weekend?
Yeah, I think I sort of forgot what that winning feeling is like. It's been so long, I've had to wait since the end of August. And for any fan that's not been to an away game this season, I was luckily enough to at Blackburn, so I have managed to see a win on the road this season. But plenty of other people that haven't been on the road and sort of weren't at Portsmouth or weren't at Blackburn, won't have seen Norwich register a win at all in the league, or maybe not even seen a point at home until that Oxford game. So it's been a while. It feels good, and I think you could sort of just get that sense of belief and that kind of release, I guess, of kind of that emotion that's been pent up frustration for so long, just unfold at Carrow Road and that full time whistle went, and the sort of euphoric scenes, the sort of the pictures of Big Phil, punching the air in front of the Barclay. It feels like old times are back, and it's crazy to see what I can do for social media as well. You sort of go on there after the game, and sometimes you sort of you doubt yourself whether you should do it to yourself. But I think Saturday it was almost like, we can get out of this mess that we're in at the moment on the pitch, which I think if you'd have said that to any fan a week ago, it was like, oh yeah, we're gone and almost resigned to League One. So yeah, let's see what Watford brings on Saturday. We'll talk about that later on. But it's nice to be talking about a win for the first time on this channel.
There's a lot for us to unpack. We'll do our best. I'd say 95% of it positive, which is such a change. And that word you said, relief, is sort of the overwhelming feeling that we all have right now. The first thing I want to point out, let's look at the game before we get on to perhaps the bigger picture and maybe the cause for a little bit of optimism and hope. What did you make of the performance itself? Because when we analysed the Oxford game, it was, okay, this is better than Birmingham. This is better than what we've seen at Carrow Road for most of the season. Norwich City should have won the game. I made the argument, I think we kind of agreed that actually Norwich didn't necessarily, I think, totally deserve to, but they should have. They had the chances. They couldn't take them. And the opportunity that was presented to them was, can they build on it with a win? They have done that. Did you leave Carrow Road with that satisfying feeling of a, not just 3 points, but a performance that you were proud of?
Yeah, I think that's definitely by far and away the best performance we've seen over the course of a 90 minutes all season long. And as much as I think, there's maybe an argument that QPR were pretty poor, but Norwich have played some teams that I feel at home this season, or maybe even on the road, have been pretty poor. And, Norwich almost fallen to that level and been worse. So I don't really agree with that. But yeah, I think over the piece, was it absolutely perfect? No. But was it a drastic improvement? Yes. The attacking elements that I think have been pretty much null and void all season was starting to be shown, and we started to see that creativity from certain individuals that maybe haven't seen all season. And just collectively over the pitch, I felt majority, if not all of the players, really put in a 7 out of 10 plus performance, which we haven't seen probably since the end of last season. So I did come away feeling a lot more positive and sort of looking at that fixture run that they've now got, thinking, okay, if we could build off this, get a couple more wins, keep ourselves in and around that picture, heading into January, strengthening a few areas where, they still look and feel a little bit short. You sort of looked at that squad on Saturday, and when it came out, I was thinking, there's not huge amounts of creativity in there again. And you look down the bench and you're thinking, okay, there's a lot of academy graduates on here who are yet to register any minutes for the senior team. And that's kind of where I think they've got to try and plug those gaps come around to January. But they've just got to keep themselves in the picture now. And that win has certainly boosted the momentum. And I think everybody's maybe starting to get a little bit carried away that things can start to turn for the better.
It's the first time leaving Carrow Road in such a long time. And you can include the back end of last season where it feels like Norwich City have played with a real high intensity and energy. And in the Manning era, as brief as it was, one thing we criticised Norwich City for was the lack of identity. It was the lack of intent. It was the lack of everything. It was it was so gutless in terms of Carrow Road. It was a very hollow place to be, and as you say, it wasn't perfect. It wasn't the prettiest at times, but you describe how, from a realistic perspective, you would hope for Norwich to play in this early spell of Philippe Clement's tenure. You ask for them to be robust, intense, and consistent with the way they pressed. And I think the second half, I think there was a little bit of a drop off, but considering how hard Norwich and how far Norwich City have fallen off in the second half performance, in their second half performances of games, it was really nice to see just constant energy and a desire. And for me, not to, I feel like we're going to do it quite a lot over the next few weeks, maybe even months and years. But the problem with Liam Manning was it felt like when he would say to Paddy O'Connor after the game, "Oh yeah, I'm encouraging the lads to play with a bit of identity," it feels like that's where it stopped with him. Philippe Clement, it feels like there is clearly a plan there and there is an identity for them to work to. I think that will evolve as Norwich City's season progresses, because right now it's how can we stop the rot, how can we get points on the board, and hopefully it'll flourish into, well, okay, how can we, score some consistently beautiful goals. So yeah, right now we've got to remain present, and it will lead to a further point that we talk about, and actually the new challenge that lays ahead for Clement. Now he's got us sort of thinking, oh, okay, here, what could you do essentially? Personnel, you mentioned you looked at that 11, you perhaps weren't keenly inspired. Who are you picking out as your key performance? Key performers. I want to go. I want to pick three players. But take the floor on that. Who are you picking as your man of the match?
Yeah, I think we discussed it, Emi Marcondes didn't exactly pull up any trees against Oxford. Pretty poor by his standards, as he sort of shown last season when he arrived, on a free transfer midway through kind of that early part of the season. And he just injected something a little bit different, a bit more creativity in that team that was obviously pretty decimated at the time and really struggling with injuries. And we just hadn't really seen him recapture that at all under Liam Manning, and that performance against Oxford. You're thinking, okay, yeah, we need to see more of the old Emi Marcondes. And we certainly saw that, I think, on Saturday. He was back to his best. Some good moments, of course, the goal to open the scoring, but also it was pivotal in that goal that Forson managed to score as well, that the touch to Sargent. So I just think, yeah, it's a performance that a lot of people can build off. Forson as well, a player who obviously wouldn't have started if it wasn't for the McConville illness. And I felt he started to show a few green shoots. Again, a player who, when he came on against Oxford, didn't exactly inspire, but sort of was a different outlet down that wide areas where Norwich haven't really had a lot of sort of creativity from the sort of wider areas this season. He was cutting in and obviously got the goal as well with a fine finish. And he's another player I look at and just think he's a confidence player. And now that goal will do him the world of good. Sort of you could see the celebrations and that sort of facial expressions, I guess, that he pulled in front of the Barclay. That just looks like a man who needs kind of that arm around the shoulder, getting himself fit and sort of playing every week. And hopefully that's the sort of start of a building block for him. And there was plenty of others, I think, that sort of, built off performances. McConville, again, I thought was another very solid performance from him at the back, a young man who is, again, sort of starting to adapt to playing men's football week in, week out, which he hasn't done for any of his career up to date. So I think there's a lot of positives there, as well as maybe even someone like Kellen, who I've been critical of in recent weeks. I felt second half he sort of definitely started to show the sort of old Kellen Fisher that we maybe saw in the early parts of last season, a few crunching tackles, good going forwards, and sort of offers them something a little bit different. So yeah, overall, plenty of good signs, and even some of the players off the bench, which I'm sure we'll talk about, sort of offered something a little bit different.
It's, Norwich at the moment are such a product of good coaching. Over the last week, you mentioned Forson and Marcondes, two players who against Oxford stunk the place out. I'm not going to be afraid to say it. Marcondes was diabolical. The caveat to that is like he did on the weekend was the same against Oxford in terms of the positions he gets himself into are really clever. He always finds himself in a position that will cause trouble for the opposition. It's just decision making on the ball. It's almost reluctance to be creative. It sort of shone through against Oxford, whereas on the weekend, as it did for Forson, not going to get carried away with their performance levels because they weren't perfect, but it was nice to see, as you said, it was those green shoots of, okay, here's what these guys who we have here, who perhaps we would have wanted to replace, here's what they still have to offer. Forson and Marcondes at two very different stages of their career. So Clement, I'm sure, is excited to almost get his teeth into, right, how can I maximise almost the rest of Marcondes and how can I help force and grow as a player. Someone we've not mentioned, Pelle Mattson, absolutely superb. I'm really glad that I have, and there's not particularly much on the line for me doing it, but I've always rated Mattson. I feel like technically he's always looked really tidy, and as was the case for probably quite a few players under Liam Manning, it was a case of it's just not being used properly. The game against QPR was for me his very clearly his best game as a Norwich City player, but it feels like it's the game that we should base further performances off in terms of what we want from him. So it was crunching tackles. He's not afraid of those. Let's not rely on them, but let's almost look at them as a privilege and enjoy them. But it's when he's on the ball, whenever he makes a pass, it feels so calculated. Like if he's playing a short pass, there's a reason for it. He's giving it to, I don't know, like when he gives it to McLean, who it's not a great example because he wasn't particularly great. But he's always giving it to someone who can do something, whether it's that short little pass, whether it's and he tried it a couple of times against Oxford, didn't quite come off. But in terms of that cutting pass, sometimes it doesn't quite work. But I want someone to continuously try that. I'm trying to think which. I think it must have been Connor on the Pink and Pod mentioned the Stoke away game for the goal and his involvement with that, and that actually, clearly being an accurate representation of what Mattson's capable of. And he's at a fantastic age, isn't he, in terms of what Clement can do to his game and how they can, and how him and his team can try and progress him as a player. And hopefully he can stay fit, because that's one thing with Ben Napper signings that, seems to be a bit of a curse, really. Hopefully he can stay fit, but that's a great feeling, isn't it? Fisher, as you say, he did what he was popular for under Thorpe. So it's those, as you said, it's those crunching tackles, which are brilliant when they come off. And Clement seems to have identified he's not your get down the line and Jack Stacey type fullback. He wants to get inside and be involved in the play, whether that be breaking it up or almost being like Mattson to a degree and making that easy pass. It's just about right now, Philippe Clement looking at what he's got and making do with it, essentially. And I know Sam said on the Pink and Pod that Clement is going to have a lot of involvement in transfers, and given his pedigree, his experience, his knowledge of football and what we've seen so far, I feel much more assured of January, as opposed to if we'd have been gambling with Liam Manning at the helm, which is, yeah, it's a nice feeling. In terms of the rest of the game, what do you make of the goals? Which one was your favourite?
Oh, I'm a big fan of the Forson goal. I think the build-up play for it and sort of the way that goal was created, from sort of the front to back, and just sort of the incisive passing that we haven't really seen, that quick intensity that was spoke about, that sort of willingness, I think, to just be a bit more sort of, on the front foot, I guess, and sort of that ability, I think, for Forson just to kind of curl it in and sort of just about manage to beat the keeper in the far post was, yeah, huge. And I think that was the goal where you sort of think, okay, we can sort of not completely feel confident, but that 2-goal buffer at home, going into it at half time was huge, I think, for the place, because you could just feel it when that goal went in. The noise level went up that extra decibel. And I think that's something that we haven't seen or felt for a long, long time. So for me, just for those reasons, really, I think that was probably the one, albeit, obviously there was a little bit of fortune with the second goal, but sometimes you just need that rub of the green. And at the moment, that's exactly what Norwich do need. And they managed to get that just to get back ahead. And that was obviously a pivotal moment in the game, particularly when, you sort of think about it and the way they conceded the equaliser. It just felt a little bit kind of much what we've seen so far this season. Maybe Norwich get themselves in front and concede a goal that, looks a little bit soft and just one that's a little bit frustrating, I guess, on the eye to concede. And you think, okay, is this going to be the moment the heads drop again and that confidence is knocked even further? And we know kind of the fragilities that Norwich have at the back. And you think, okay, is this going to be another one of those days? But the fact that Norwich managed to, sort of get themselves back up and be back on the front foot and attacking, is something we've, not seen under Liam Manning whatsoever. So, it was a breath of fresh air.
It's such a, it's great to have that. I'm just trying to think of how to describe it, really. So, for example, Ruari McConville, someone who was signed by Ben Napper, who hopefully can now kick on and maybe tilt the favour of good to bad signings in favour of Ben Napper remaining in position. It's nice to almost have that revitalised outlook on what we have in front of us, rather than thinking we need to massively overhaul everything, which, don't get me wrong, Norwich City do need to make signings in key areas. For example, a winger is first and foremost where Norwich City need to be looking. Both fullbacks is a position that needs to probably have a bit more quality there, if they're going to want to achieve the ultimate, end goal. But it's nice to have just a proper coach. It's difficult to avoid just constantly saying that. But the way Philippe Clement has handled himself and showing that emotion at the end of the game, really shows, just promising signs. Now, before we get on to perhaps the post-match scenes, because we've lapped up a bit of love for some of the key performers for Norwich. Going back to Philippe Clement mentality, what did you think when Norwich City took the lead and instantly conceded the equaliser? Was it a case of here we go again, or almost did you feel a bit of resilience to it?
Yeah, I think you always fear that sort of element of deja vu because it's what we've been used to now for 3, 4, 5 months. And that's almost ingrained, I think, in Norwich City fans' mindsets. And you kind of, yeah, you do kind of get that edgy sort of feel in the crowd, and people get a little bit kind of, yeah, just kind of fearing the worst, I guess. But for me, I didn't fear that quite the same, I don't think, just given kind of all the positives we saw of that showing against Oxford and everything that Clement has said so far, and it's just his man management of sort of decisions and sort of big moments within games just feels a lot more, yeah, old school, sort of a little bit experience, a little bit of nous, and even just the way he's handled some of the players off the bench. Obviously the Eurosec one is the one that we've spoke about quite heavily on the last podcast, and the way he dealt with that, and I felt at the time, I thought, yep, he's come out and faced it up, and everything he said was spot on. And then to bring him on in that game, and just to see Eurosec just look like a player who wanted that sort of almost to prove a point, and sort of the way he sort of went and chased down balls and lost causes, something he wasn't doing at all against Oxford. That's what I want to see from a head coach, and that ability to do that. Jacob Wright as well, sort of trying him in a different position that I think a lot of fans seem to like the look of, and something I'm intrigued to see what he's going to do within the coming weeks. So yeah, even the Mundell Smith, again, another player that, Manning all right threw on for a couple of minutes, but not really utilised the way he went to him and turned to a young man like that who's not had a lot of exposure to first team football and goes, yeah, you know what, mate, go and try yourself and sort of put the effort level in, and that's all I'm going to demand from you. And we saw that from the minute he stepped on the pitch. So everything really lends itself to be quite positive, which is a dangerous position to be in because, yeah, we've all sort of been through it so far this season.
It's, the real test for Eurosec is actually, can you match that standard now? So it's the same for example, for Jacob Wright when he came off the bench as well. I think it's the most energetic he's looked. And Clement, I think, almost set a similar challenge of maybe not so much for Eurosec because it was his natural position, but it was right, get out there, show me energy, don't cock this up. What your teammates have built, this cushion that they've given us. Get out there, be intense, show energy, show desire, which they both did. Jacob Wright looked a lot quicker than perhaps what I was anticipating when he sort of stepped into that number 10 role. I thought, right, he just stinks of James Maddison there. So, some of the touches were absolutely phenomenal. A couple of those passes, incredible. Clearly just such a gifted footballer who I think once he's almost settled in that number 10 role, I think is just going to just stroll through championship teams at will, which I look forward to watching. But as is the case with Matej Jurasek, it's right. Here's the bar. You've managed to sort of claw your way up there. Do it every week. It's not just 5 minutes or 10 minutes at Carrow Road at the end of a win where the vibes are good and you can do it and you can get your applause and you can almost score with your first touch. Conditions aren't always going to be like that. Sometimes he's going to be brought on when we're 3-0 down. Sometimes he's going to be brought on when it's 1-1 and we're chasing the game in a different way. You've got to have that bare minimum standard, which right now, as we sit here and we still almost reel from excitement from the weekend, is okay, yeah, do you know what? Why can't he go and do that? Which is a very different position to what we found ourselves in and almost believing before, even after the Oxford game, which was, again, it's all down to Philippe Clement and it's down to the players putting in the effort. The offside goal, what do you reckon? It was onside, wasn't it? I'm absolutely crushed for Sarge.
I must confess, yeah, I was lower Regency on Saturday, and obviously that's not the greatest position to maybe be able to see whether a player's just sort of strayed that extra few sort of centimeters or whatever ahead of the man. But I felt at the time it was onside, and you kind of looked at the celebrations of the players, and usually, you know, if it's kind of one of them where you think, okay, let's just have a little peer over the shoulder, the fact that all of them almost kind of were instantly ready to go and celebrate, and then you kind of look over and think, oh, okay, he's actually flagged that. And having seen sort of different pictures from different angles since, I definitely think it was onside, and such a frustrating one because Sargent could have done with that goal just from a sort of confidence point of view. As much as I think he was more involved, and we started to see a few more glimmers of the old Josh Sargent, and I think the goals will soon come for him. Yeah, goal for him would have been absolutely mammoth, and just kind of that again, just building on that confidence for the whole team really as a unit, just not just him as an individual. So frustrating one to take, but I'm sure, you know, as we move into the coming weeks that he'll be back on the goal track.
So the challenge that lies ahead that I sort of referenced earlier, it's along the same theme of what I mentioned in terms of Jurasek and Jacob Wright, which is the standard's been set. What do we do now? So when Philippe Clement came in, it was right. What can you do here, mate? See what you can make work. And now Norwich City find themselves on. I don't want to get too carried away, but technically, it's an upwards trajectory. It's a terrible first half versus Birmingham and a decent response. It's a point, should have been 3 points at home against Oxford, and it is then 3 points at Carrow Road in a fairly decent performance. So it's an upwards trajectory. Philippe Clement now faces the challenge of, okay, you know, me and you and everyone watching and getting behind Norwich and they're thinking, okay, you know, let's see what you've got to offer almost. How do you think he approaches that? Because Watford away is not the prettiest of fixtures to see up next for Norwich City, but equally mid-table away from home. And I think one of their, I can't remember what his name is, their winger, one of their key players is missing the next 2 or 3 games for whatever reason. You start thinking, okay, what can we do here? Going into that game, I don't want to make it necessarily about Watford specifically, but how do we as fans manage the expectation, and what do you just expect from Norwich, really?
Yeah, I think, you know, you look at kind of the home form table, Watford sit fifth in that with 18 points. You know, they've been good at Vicarage Road, but it's a place that Norwich have been able to go to previously. And I think it's one of them where, again, if you can get yourselves on the front foot, try and find an early goal, you can almost kind of just, yeah, turn that crowd. And that's kind of where Norwich have got to use those little tiny things at the moment just to kind of their own advantage, because they've not been able to do that really at all so far this season. And you go back to maybe last season, you know, with Torrup and that performance there, it wasn't a pretty performance. It was almost kind of a dogged, we need to sit in and defend for our lives here. But Norwich managed to do that. And I think they're starting to show a little bit more of that resilience at the back. So if they could almost use that as kind of a plan, and then, you know, you've got the quality now in the attacking areas. We saw that demonstrated certainly on Saturday. And we know the quality of Josh Sargent, even though he hasn't been sort of finding the back of the net recently. So yeah, I think that's kind of where I'm looking at the game on Saturday and thinking to myself, yeah, it's going to be not an easy one, and Norwich are going to have to soak up some pressure, and there's going to be difficult moments. They're going to face adversity. It's something that they've not really dealt with overly well so far this season, but they are starting to show some green shoots, certainly under Clement. And what's quite exciting is he's got a few sort of players maybe on that periphery that are coming back from injuries to add to the mix fairly soon. And I look at some of those individuals, someone like Cordova, a player that he wanted at Rangers, someone who maybe be able to suit what he's trying to do here, and even someone like Diallo, who we haven't really seen enough of so far this season, consistently, you know, sort of finding the levels that Norwich paid the money for it in the summer. So, I'm sort of cautiously optimistic that he's kind of got that, because, yeah, there is quite a few away games now coming up. I think it's 3 of the next 4 on the road, and some of them are difficult trips. You know, that Preston's not going to be easy. Sheffield United are starting to find some form at the moment, and Chris Wilder's always, you know, historically a difficult opponent to come up against. And even the home game against Southampton, you know, they're starting to sort of find some form under their new management. So yeah, it's not an easy run, but I think Norwich have just got to demonstrate the basics well again, keep up the energy levels that they've demonstrated now over the last couple of games, and yeah, sort of try and find those quality within the moments that are key, and yeah, utilize that to the maximum.
Yeah, that's the key thing for me. I completely agree. So when we sit and do this next week, I want to almost have the same discussion, hopefully about the same players, maybe even more, where you can look at their performance and go, yeah, they gave it 110%. I'd love a win. I'd bite your hand off for a point. I'm not going to cry if we lose, because there's a lot of football to be played, and actually now we've seen performances improve. There's almost something to believe in. Norwich have obviously been to Vicarage Road and won this season, but that was a really odd game, wasn't it? I think what was it, 2-1 or 3-1 or whatever it was, I know that, where it was just a really ugly game. Watford put the pressure on at the end and were probably unlucky not to maybe claw it back to send it to pens. Or yeah, it was a bizarre one. So we probably aren't going to touch on that as a reference point. Obviously they've changed managers naturally, as they would, since that game. And who's the chap they brought back? Because he was there. He was there as part of their best Premier League finish, wasn't he? I really should know his name, but there you go. So it's not going to be an easy game, as you mentioned. But actually, what we can expect as Norwich City fans is players to go out there and to leave it all out on the pitch. If not for us, then through the fear of Philippe Clement and the wrath that he clearly. I mean, the man is terrifying, which I think is absolutely bloody excellent. And it's interesting you mentioned Cordoba as one of the players who are out, and we'll get on to another who's almost been a bit of a talking point recently. But Cordoba, I kind of have until I maybe see him for, Clement, just written off, because at the best of times, just a bit of a donkey. But now I've seen what Clement has done with McConville in terms of maybe extracting that confidence and playing him in his strongest position, and perhaps the way he's starting to turn Harry Darling's form around. I'm still not quite convinced by him. But players who perhaps we weren't the most enthralled about, Ben Napper signed players. Yeah, well, what could he do to Cordoba? Maybe he can make him reliable, maximize sort of his traits, because his athleticism is one thing that he has, above all of the other players contending for his position. Not that the bar is particularly high for pace along that back line. But another name is Matthias Fiskaren. Where do you sit on that situation? Because he clearly a quality player, proven it, scored goals in really dark times for Norwich. Is it just patience for you?
Yeah, I think the challenge, I felt he was pretty good on it actually post-match on Saturday, sort of the explanation maybe as to why he's not starting games at the moment. We saw it, I think, at Birmingham, certainly against kind of teams that will punish you within those moments. Maybe you just need that sort of extra body sort of in that more central middle of the park at the moment, just to kind of make yourself a little bit more resilient. And, kind of the challenges when you've got two very good strikers at this level who both want to be playing and both will score you goals. How do you fit them both in and get them both firing, but also keep yourself kind of less leaky at the back? And I think that's maybe where he's going to have to try and sort of fix that jigsaw puzzle at the moment. And the early signs are, just trying to get the form back and get a few wins on the board. And then maybe as we sort of move through the season, he's going to be able to maybe introduce and put his imprint a little bit more onto this squad. And when they understand what's expected of them, I think there's going to be a lot more ability, I guess, to play and maybe tinker with it and try and bring maybe both of those individuals on the pitch at the same time. Because if Norwich can get both of them on the pitch at the same time, I think they can outscore most teams if they've got the attacking quality in those sort of wider areas, and maybe as creative sort of number 10, if they can maybe unlock Jacob Wright in that position or whatever it might be, then I think, there is a recipe there for some quite exciting football and plenty of goals. But at the moment, it's just about that sort of energy we said, and just kind of making yourself more resilient, harder to beat. His early days for Clement. So, yeah, I'm not kind of going to be too critical or too judgmental on his decisions early doors.
He clearly is a confidence builder, as a bare minimum, Philippe Clement, because the players we've spoken about just look like they are a bit more comfortable on the pitch. Clearly, structurally, Norwich City, it's night and day, the difference. Execution is different in terms of when they're on the ball, they're not always brilliant, which is fine. That's football. You're not always going to be brilliant. If you were, then you'd be playing under Pep Guardiola for Manchester City. But it's nice to see footballers out there not just looking confident, but just clued up. It's part of that. Philippe Clement has always come in and gone, guys, I've got this. And Paddy made a really good point on the Pink and Pod of just Clement's experience, and actually this isn't too big of a challenge for him. And it feels like with the previous two managers, and I'm just going to reiterate, this is Paddy's point, I just thought it was brilliant, which is with Thorpe. So we're talking about Ben Appereira stuff here. With Thorpe, it felt like he was learning as every day went, which for what we were sold at the time was fine. But ultimately, he paid the price for not being able to adapt in the way that was expected of him, rightly or wrongly. And then Manning, just there wasn't anything at all. Whereas Clement has come in with bags of relevant experience. You know, he touched on that SPL experience in his latest press conference. I think it was the post-match stuff where someone asked him if he was surprised at what the championship was throwing at him, and he mentioned, actually, I've been in the SPL, and not to say the leagues are the same, but actually the characteristics of intense, aggressive teams pressing against the better teams, almost that dogfight style, combative football. It's really not that different. It's just obviously in the SPL, if you get towards the top end of that, you can almost dream in the Champions League and the Europa League, can't you? So it's nice that he's come into this and been like, guys, I've got this. And actually, I've done this before. And players of all ages are being affected in positive ways, and almost being allowed to flourish in their strongest positions towards the end of Manning's time. It was so clear. It's the most I've ever felt that players haven't played for a manager. And Sam made this point about David Wagner, and I really hate David Wagner revisionism, but he managed to get the best out of a pretty, I wouldn't want to say poor, but a not great squad, an aging squad, which had some very good players in. But he basically just told them, everyone thinks you're crap, do something. Whereas the last two managers before Clement have never quite been able to solve that confidence problem, because of, you know, unfortunate stuff like injuries and, you know, losing, like for Thorpe with Johnny Rowe, losing your best players in the first couple of weeks of your job. It's never easy. What do you think of, moving on, in terms of Philippe Clement and actually reputation and January? Do you feel a bit more optimistic about it, and the idea that actually he can attract a higher caliber of player?
Yeah, I do. You sort of touched there about maybe on some of his experiences, the fact he's managed at so many different sort of levels, and you kind of look at each of those leagues. You go from playing at, you know, Celtic Park one week to, you know, maybe Falkirk the next week, and the differences that sort of brings to you as an experience, and even kind of those differences maybe within working within France and maybe playing at PSG one week to, you know, Lens the next week. It's completely different, and that's something that I know Liam Manning's got championship experience, and the championship does have different types of teams in it, but there is kind of that difference in mentality. I think when you've been in different leagues, you've sort of worked with different players, and the fact that he's got a background where he's capable of working with sort of different nationalities and different individuals, and maybe sort of making them a strong collective unit and utilizing that sort of mentality that you spoke about there, and that sort of willingness, that fight and that energy. It does give me a little bit more hope for what could happen in January and what Norwich might be doing to try and strengthen it. It's felt maybe for the last 2-3 years, maybe even sort of since Farker departed, a lot of the recruitment has kind of been more driven towards what the sort of sporting director or those who are in recruitment positions are maybe wanted, as opposed to what the head coach actually demands and wants. And I know David Wagner maybe got his wish a little bit too much on that front. But yeah, I think if we can try and utilize what Clement wants and Napa can work with him, then I think they can identify between them, hopefully, some decent players. You know, Napa's not got a great track record, but hopefully be able to lean on that experience that Clement's got working within the game at different levels, and been able to sort of have a wider scope, I guess, on what's available there in the market. Then while it's a difficult market to navigate January, and it's not going to be easy for Norwich, they've got to find a solution, and quick. And I do feel a lot more confident, I think, having Clement at the helm, as opposed to we would have had Liam Manning and it'd have been sort of a January geared towards him. And then if it doesn't work out, that sort of frustration and that anger that we've sort of felt for a long time would have really sort of, I think, hit boiling point, and the scenes outside Carrow Road would have been a lot more ugly than what they were over sort of the course of the last few months.
It feels like with Big Phil, I like the idea of him consulting Ben Napa and his recruitment team, because they can sign decent players, like we've seen with like Pelle Mattson coming to the forefront of things now in terms of that conversation. Now he's had his Tom Tribal versus Leeds game where he does everything. Jacob Wright, another example. Kovacevic, Harry Darling at the beginning, you know, great value signing. Going blank, Makama. I'm just thinking of players this season who I just, they can clearly sign decent players, but equally, I don't know. It's a tough thing, isn't it? You know, when you look back at like Stuart Webber signings, for example, probably more of them were what we look back at as almost banter signings as there were good ones. But you only need a few good ones to get promoted or to have a good season. So it's an interesting thing because of the sheer volume of, and it's you know, it's a different challenge that Ben Napa has to Stuart Webber, because the purse strings were so tight with Stuart Webber, whereas with Ben Napa, it's that freedom and almost, well, no, it's a different kind of pressure in here's all this money. If you spend it wrong, you're an idiot. Whereas with Weber, it was almost like just, as is his soundbite, it was, free hit after free hit after free hit. But with Clement consulting, it's a lot more of an exciting prospect. Right, Adam, moving on from our off-air analysis of mulled wine, which for the record, disgusting. Your take?
I would agree with that assessment.
Key information there. Please don't ever bring me a glass of mulled wine. It just makes me uncomfortable in my hand. Like just warm wine. It's not right. Just stop mulled wine. Moving on. Watford away. A happy stomping ground for Norwich City. What do you think? You've done a little bit of research. Tell me about it. And as a Norwich City fan, how do you feel ahead of Saturday?
Yeah, I sort of looked at Watford's form, and I think it's 2 wins in their last 7, quite a few draws in that run as well. But as I mentioned, very strong at home, so not going to be an easy test. But quite interestingly, they've only got 1 clean sheet all season, which is obviously matched with Norwich City at the bottom of the Championship table in terms of that statistic. So pretty clear to see that they are a little bit shaky and do concede goals, albeit I think it's on average about 1.3 a game. So they're not sort of conceding loads and loads of goals, but they do on average concede 1 a game, which when you sort of touched on it, we touched on it earlier, Josh Sargent, a player who needs a goal. He loves a goal against Watford. That would be absolutely huge if he could sort of find himself in a position to score on Saturday, particularly if Norwich could go and get themselves ahead in the game, because I think Watford notoriously have more struggled when they're sort of trying to come from behind within games. When they sort of tend to poke themselves ahead, they're a little bit stronger. So, yeah, I think all the metrics make for interesting reading. Yeah, they're not a side that are afraid of scoring goals either. I think they're 10th in that metric for the Championship so far this season. So they've got some firepower. That you touched on it. I think Barr is out injured, who's one of their sort of more dangerous players. Rocco Vata, who I think is very highly regarded as a young player, but they have got quite a young squad as well. Watched a little bit of their game last night against Birmingham, and very, very poor in the first half. They sort of succumbed to what Norwich had to deal with at St Andrews, a Birmingham side that's full of competence at the moment, and a team that's sort of looking like they're going to be on the up rather than sliding further down the table. But second half, they sort of had that fight back ability, obviously grabbed the goal and made it uncomfortable for Birmingham. And I think Norwich, for those reasons, are going to have to be aware of that threat. But for all that's been said there is potential here for Norwich to go there and get a point on, and hopefully 3. And that would be absolutely huge, just to keep building on this sort of positive momentum that we've spoken about over the course of the podcast, and sort of bring that then into a difficult test at Bramall Lane on Tuesday night, where, again, Norwich are going to face adversity. It's going to be difficult. They're going to have to fight. But I think within, Philippe Clement's mantra, it's about fighting, it's about energy, it's about intensity. And if Norwich can demonstrate that at both of those two places, they're going to make it uncomfortable for both of those teams.
Yeah, disclaimer, this is being recorded and will be released on, what is it today? Tuesday, the 2nd. This is pre-press conference, pre-injury list. So hopefully, like, Jack Stacey's knock wasn't too bad, because he wasn't great. Yeah, bless him. He's never great, is he? But actually, for what Norwich are right now, is he's very mobile. He's very willing, and he fits the bill for how you want Norwich to play at the moment. Players coming back, Adam, because I want to move us on to the bigger picture. That list of injuries is often referenced and used as a give me a bit of time card. It was used by Manning. It's being used by Clement. It's been used by Ben Napper when he went and took his media whippings. Who on that list of injuries do you look at as okay, yeah, let's get them back and kick on?
Yeah, there's a couple for me. I think Lucien Mahovo, just to have a natural left-footed left back, as opposed to what they've had to deal with maybe in recent weeks, where we've had to see sort of Fisher shoehorned into that position. We've seen Kenny McLean under Liam Manning, who we know has sort of demonstrated his ability to play in that position within different times of his Norwich City career, but naturally not sort of gifted to play that position. You've also got Sloop, who was starting to maybe just show a few glimmers of sort of what he's about and that experience, which, again, we maybe spoke about kind of those experienced players and Norwich's lack of that maybe across the board. Certainly players that have played in the Championship and sort of played at higher levels within the English football pyramid. He's a player who fits that bill. So he could be a useful player for Clement to kind of utilise, I guess, within this squad. But for me, it's probably Diallo, because we spoke maybe about Norwich's lack of width and lack of pace at different points over the course of recording this podcast over recent months. And he's a player who, we've seen flashes of it, but not really sort of been able to be moulded, I don't think, yet into kind of what Norwich need as a player to play in the Championship for 90 minutes every single game and maybe be involved within games a bit more. So he's maybe one that I think, Clement could utilise and use well, particularly because he's maybe worked within sort of French football and that will hopefully sort of give him a little bit more of a background on Diallo as a player and maybe one that he's hopefully aware of and some of the talents that he's got. So they're probably the main ones that I look at. McCarmer obviously hopefully be back from illness as well because he's a player who so far has shown that he's very capable of playing at this level and definitely demonstrated that in Clement's first home game against Oxford with the goal and just his general play in that first half where he was absolutely excellent. So he'll give them a different option. And again, that physicality, that height that he's got, but also, ability with the ball at his feet as well to sort of be able to navigate his way sort of past defenders. So yeah, I'm sort of hopeful, I think, with maybe those players. I don't know what you think.
The key takeaway is actually it's almost not changing completely, but it's that different outlook on the players who are injured, no matter who they are and what we think of them. I referenced my point about Cordoba earlier. Actually, I'm quite interested to see what Clement can do to him, and it's still a position that's up for grabs for Norwich. You can't just base the rest of the season off of Saturday, which of all people, Philippe Clement will be well aware of. So it'll be nice to see him be able to just have a play, see what he can do. Diallo is, his opening gambit was against Watford, wasn't it? That cup game where we saw Diallo, and there's really neat touches, really bright spells of just almost gliding past players. He clearly is incredibly quick, but it's felt like he's reluctant to use that pace. What I'm hoping is that Clement and my research indicates that Clement likes at least one traditional winger, someone who can be a little bit explosive on the ball and push forward and take players on. Hopefully he can try and extract some kind of performance like that from Diallo. So where I've gone from what is this guy to okay, what can Clement get from him? I have a great deal of hope, not so much because I am massively confident he'll just be a completely new player, but actually because there's that little ember still flickering that's just almost wanting to burst into a big flame, and in a good way, I must add, which is it's a nice feeling. Liam Gibbs is another one who I think really fits the bill for what Norwich City need at the moment, which is I feel like a pretty sweeping statement. Liam Gibbs' traits, indicate he's very mobile. He's very intense. He rats around the place. He winds people up with his sort of style of performance. He's not afraid to win a foul. He's not afraid to put a tackle in. Technically, I think he's quite underrated. On the ball, he's actually got a pretty good passing range. And again, it's fitness is the constant issue with him. But I want to see him with a clean bill of health to get in a Clement team. And like I said, for all the players being given that clean slate with Clement, he's just another one where it's okay, he's now got a point to prove, which we as Norwich City fans should benefit from. We should see a player with desire and fight just for their own selfish gain to play football, which is a bare minimum, is how it should be. But as we've seen this season, and as has been the cause of Norwich City finding themselves in this position, just hasn't been the case. It feels like positions have been taken for granted, but no more. Those days are done. I feel happy. I feel like we've covered everything. Is there any parting words you wish to make or depart with to maybe a point that we can reflect on next week? Like okay, here we go. Say something right now that we can look back on next week, and it can be an expectation, it can be a hope, it can be a wish. What comes to the forefront of your mind?
I just think keep the positive momentum rolling on, just kind of that feeling of hope and excitement of going to games again, which had certainly diminished for, a long time. It was kind of going to Carrow Road, and as much as we all love it and enjoy it, it's kind of our church, it's our place that we go to every weekend and we almost feel at home. It hadn't quite felt like that. It had that kind of sort of underlying anger and underlying frustration. It was sort of that kettle that was boiling and just waiting to reach that boiling point before it all got a little bit ugly. Just feel like if Norwich are on the road, couple of games, make yourself dogged, make yourself difficult to beat, come away with a couple of decent performances and hopefully a few results within that as well. And then I think we roll it into that Southampton game, 12:30 kickoff. just feeling a little bit optimistic again, and sort of that sort of feeling that we all had coming away from Carrow Road on Saturday will hopefully be there heading to the game, not just coming away from the game. So that's kind of where I'm at. But I'm really looking forward to it. A trip to Watford on Saturday. I'm going again, so that's a grand that I think I've seen Norwich win at a few times. So, and not that I'm sort of superstitious and kind of like these stats, but yeah, there is part of me that always feels a little bit more comfortable and confident when I've seen Norwich win at a grand a few times, and Watford is one of those. So long may that continue, and let's hope for 3 points.
Yes, football, isn't it? Two things from me. One, let's hope Sarge gets his goal, which I think he will. And I feel like you think he will as well. Let's stick that on the record. We're going to chat next week about a Sargent goal, hopefully in the right end. And the other thing is, as you say, we want to be able to be proud of Norwich. We want to almost not have shame hang over our head when we associate ourselves with Norwich City. The main point and criticism with Norwich this season has been it's embarrassing to be a Norwich fan. You do not associate with these players. You do not feel anything towards them. What we've seen in Philippe Clement's very short time so far at Norwich City is, with this little upwards trajectory, is actually it is possible to like what is there. It's important to remember it's not going anywhere. Oh, I'm sure we'll see a couple of departures in January, but it's not going anywhere. So we need to see everything we can to get us on board, to get us hooked, to get us addicted to wanting to go, because we still go regardless, don't we? So hopefully this time next week we can sit down and we can talk about how Norwich hopefully got 3 points, but played with pride and intensity and just desire. All the classic footballing buzzwords. Adam, it's been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed talking about a win. God, I hope we get to do it again. We are creeping up on 500 subscribers, so hopefully we get to hit that soon through no other reason than just being quite pleased with ourselves. So thanks as always for the support. Thanks to the people who listen on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Those numbers are creeping up as well. We see you. We appreciate you. Fingers crossed for 3 points on the weekend on the Ball City, and we'll see you in the next one.